Okay. Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. So, you've got a book out called Caged: The True Story of Abuse, Betrayal, and GTMO. This is a memoir of your own personal experience. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
Okay. So, you worked in the government. What exactly did you do in the government?
I worked for a little under 10 years for the Department of Navy. I started as an education facilitator, eventually becoming the director, and I finished out my time as a transition specialist for the government.
Transition specialist. Okay. So, that's helping people adjust from military to civilian life.
That's correct.
Okay. And relearning all new acronyms when they get into civilian
Yes.
life, right? Yeah. What is the hardest part that you found for people to adjust? What were they having the most difficulty with?
I think the hardest part for members of the military, and of course, we also had spouses that would attend the transitioning classes that we did. Services were provided for dependents, was learning to get back into just being themselves. The rigors of day to day life, doing different resumes, different. It's basically a different language. And so the whether or not they were choosing just to be retired for those that had been career members, or new options for what they wanted to do in employment paths. And so choices, they had to figure out some of them what they wanted to be now. And it was very daunting for many individuals and how they wanted to go forward with their lives.
So, you mean when you say be themselves, you mean as opposed to their rank?
Right. It's not just the uniform they put on, but whether or not they wanted to change. Some changed career paths. Some were changing locations, were changing roles within their families. For some, it was their dependents, their spouse's time to choose to be the breadwinner in their families.
Okay. So, why don't you just tell the story? Tell a little bit about the book and what happened.
So the book came out. It's been out now since November, was the release date, but the information is really a culmination of which came out for the title Caged, was putting out the the memoir of information that was in some respects prevented over the years, and by those that either had counseled in a variety of ways of not telling, between myself and my daughters, of what life really was like in our house, with my husband. And um, this last couple weeks marks 7 years since he died. And um, you know, as a survivor of domestic violence, the the inability to really talk about what life is like. We spent almost 20 years in, you know, in not being able to really represent what was going on behind closed doors. And so the public got to see in through the international headlines of what happened in 2015 by a lot of salacious and misrepresented um, happenings when my husband died while we were down in at the naval station in Guantanamo Bay, and which led to many years of news reportings of a man that really didn't exist, and certainly not in our house.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the story. So, he was in the military?
No, and actually, that's one of the problems that happened. So in 2015, in 2011, my husband and I were both. He was a government employee who worked for the Navy Exchange, actually, and we were. He took a job down in the naval station at that time. He was not in the military. And in 2015, we were at a what they would call a hail and farewell. It's a military function where you say goodbye to one person and hello to the incoming member. And at that night, we ended up having a fight, and my husband disappeared and was found, had died 2 days later. He had drowned. What was reported, and what was factual from there on out was very different. It made international headlines because we were stationed at the naval station in Guantanamo Bay. What didn't come out was the fact that my husband had assaulted me that evening. It complicates matters because what has been put out there in the media was that, like you said, was he military? My husband was military when I met him. I was a young military spouse. But he got out of the military in the 90s. And it wasn't until after he passed away that I ended up finding out that he got out of the military because he was kicked out of the military. He was not an honorably discharged member. So during the time that the media presented it, it started to make it look like he was a member of the military down there. He was not. And actually, during that time period that I was very quiet, I found a lot of things about my husband that didn't actually know about.
Can you give me one example of what he was that you didn't know?
Absolutely. After he died, we had, the week after he passed, I had was putting together a service down in GTMO, so that because I couldn't bury him there. But I had a funeral service and I was expecting to do a military honors. And so I had to file away for that. And I knew that there was something wrong with the military honors that was being done. And it was after that service that I ended up finding out that my husband was not discharged from the military honorably. And so it was from that moment that it went into also finding out that while we were married, he canceled his life insurance policy. He had DUIs that I didn't know about. He had suspended licenses. He had been seeing the doctor on base, and had been given medications like Prozac and Atarax. So there was it was like every few days I was getting something else and then something else and something else. And that happened for months. So while I'm trying to handle all kinds of between investigations and media, and my daughters and I are trying to grieve. I'm finding things about a man I in somewhat didn't know who he was.
How long were you married?
Almost 20 years.
Wow. But you didn't know about him seeing a doctor with the medication or any of that?
No. And I mean, we had been counseling throughout the years, and mostly unsuccessful. But the last 6 months that we were in GTMO, he was seeing the base, the naval doctors on base. And I was not privileged to that. No.
You said he died by drowning. Do you think that his death was a suicide?
I don't know. I was asked that once before, and, we had 2 children together. So I don't want to ever think that he would leave, no matter how tumultuous our relationship was. And I don't think anybody would want to leave purposefully. Even if there were mental health issues involved. And during the grieving process, that after he died, there was a lot of difficulties even for myself. But he struggled with a lot of issues. And even knowing that I no longer wanted to be with him, I spent half my life with him. I spent half my life with somebody that I wanted, in some respects, I was grieving a person that I didn't know. I couldn't possibly know what was going on with him because I don't think I ever really knew who he was.
You said that the reporting of this made international news, and yet the reporting in your mind was very inaccurate, what they were saying?
Yes, I don't think, and every year since then, there have been people that have picked up reporting on it, because it's like they want to create, it's like a Lifetime movie that they want to create out of it, and yet instead of they run pictures of him from his boot camp days. He was in his 40s. He wasn't in boot camp.
Well, why?
This isn't A Few Good Men.
Why would they want to spin this? I mean, was there any particular motivation to spin the story?
Oh, because in my mind, it's like any other news day and articles. I
Spice
think
it up.
it's interesting to read. It's GTMO, and it's either it lands on a political side or it lands on a salacious side. And instead of asking questions, the reports of domestic violence have come out, and instead of wanting to talk about how they can improve that, how they can, what could have been done, how, there's a lot of alcohol usage. What could we do to help that? But instead, it's just looking at, a very small piece of a conversation instead of a whole picture of the conversation. And I think it doesn't do the whole picture a lot of justice in the end. And it certainly doesn't help his daughters or me or other spouses or the system that is still having problems.
I know that there has been a lot of attention to domestic abuse in military families and military people. People are becoming a little bit more aware of it, and people are talking about it. It was sort of hushed up for a long time. There is outlets for people who are suffering from this now, right?
There's conversations.
There's conversations. Okay.
There's conversations. And there was a subcommittee hearing that was done last year or the year before. One of the members even admitted that it had been 15 years since they had done anything when it came to domestic violence. But that is what the subcommittee hearing or the subcommittee is supposed to be addressing, that there was anything being done with domestic violence in the military. As they were making conversations and putting up, and they've talked about how they really need to do something, there are programs that have been in place since the late 70s. One of those programs being the one that I worked for. They're so steeped with red tape and boxes to check, and the committees are filled with uniformed members. And so the help that some of these dependents or even military members themselves, it depends on how mission essential the person you're reporting.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And they've had committee hearings that have gone all the way up to DC with it. And even the last defense bill that went in, that was over 1,300 pages. They had domestic violence was mentioned 13 times. That included the table of contents and a footnote. Yet what was reported was how serious they were getting with domestic violence. It's not very serious. But after they came out and they were passing the defense bill, and they said they've done great strides in making sure that domestic violence and sexual assault victims were going to be taken care of. The only thing is that it's for punitive actions, and people have to get to the punitive action. You can't get to the punitive action unless somebody allows it to get there, and it's always been that way. You know, there's a cliche that's gone around in the military, or if the military wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one.
Yeah.
And since it's so prevalent and the joke is so known, it's not a joke anymore. Even for the defense bill, as much as they were trying to get it pushed through for sexual assault and domestic violence, they still had members in there who went in behind closed doors and said, you know what, we don't like this, so we need to take some of this verbiage away. They still had all the heads of the military who felt that their control was going to be taken away because it hurt Mission Essential. Mission Essential is broken every time somebody abuses a member of their family. And that includes another member of the military. It is mission essential. Family is mission essential. And until they start looking at it that way, then it's never going to change. And the mission hurts every time somebody abuses another person.
Lara, we do have to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Absolutely. So my website is just my name, larasabanosh.com. And I also have the social media pages as well.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. Best of luck with the book. The book is out and available now?
Yes, it is. I have the Kindle versions or e versions and the paperback as well.
Okay.